Hey everyone, it's Alan Brochstein from 420 Investor and New Cannabis Ventures, and I'm here with the weekly update on the market. This is a preview of the newsletter we'll be publishing at New Cannabis Ventures tomorrow. I have a link in the summary of this if you want to sign up to receive it in the future. We also publish it to the web on Sunday morning as well. This was a brutal week. I've been watching this space for almost 9 years. It was one of the worst weeks ever, and it followed a really strong week. So when you put it all together, last week wiped out the prior 2 weeks of gains and left the global cannabis stock index at a new 2021 low. So what happened? Well, so first of all, I think there was some disappointment as the week played out. I remember last week we talked about $151 million that MSOS, the ETF, had in cash, and they were pretty slow to deploy it. Now, the interesting thing is they got more cash in during the week, and they did spend a lot, but they ended up, I think, with 137 million net. So I think that was contributing to a little bit of concern, but I don't think that was really the issue. So, in hindsight, I got pretty excited by this, as did many others, and maybe it was just a head fake. I'm not sure really, why the MSOs ran up so much and then got pummeled. But when I step back and look at what happened, we had an earnings season that we just went through, and I'll get to that more in just a moment. But I think the larger companies, by and by, had reports that were not as bad as feared, but there were some bad reports last week, especially from companies out of California. So that might have been part of it. I'd say also the Canadian LPs were under a lot of pressure this week. There were some 52-week lows as well. And so there were two things worth noting, just very briefly on this. Number one, Bank of America reduced their coverage by 50%. Previously, they had also been covering Aurora and Tilray, but due to a need to reallocate resources, they cut those two and now are only covering Kronos and Canopy. The other part was that Barclays took a look at the space. It was a 70-page research piece, and they came up with something that I think is pretty obvious. This is something I say all the time to my subscribers at 420 Investor, and it's correct, I believe, that the very largest LPs just can't really justify their market caps by what's going on in Canada. Now, there was also some potentially good news, but I'm sure it'll take a long time to play out, and that was that Germany is moving towards legalization, and that's a big country, 83 million, and obviously a lot more people in the European Union. So pretty nasty week, kind of hard to explain the action. I would just remind everybody that our sector is now down a little bit year to date. It's especially down a lot from when people showed up in January and February, and so this is a year that's kind of odd where all the stocks are up except ours. I'm not going to cry too much about that, but tax loss selling could be playing a role here. So with that, let me remind everyone that at New Cannabis Ventures, we publish a lot of curated content, the press releases that are most substantial, most significant. And in the newsletter, we include links to la creme de la creme there, just the most important of the most important. And then we also have our own proprietary content. On the press releases that we run, they tend to be focused on financial reports, M&A, and capital raises. So there was a capital raise. It totally crushed the stock. And it's kind of funny. I think this was before I started doing these video summaries, but there's a company, Flora Growth, that went public at $5 earlier this year. It's a Colombian producer. And I was trying to explain to our readers how the index was rallying a lot in, I believe it was either late August or early September, but it was being pushed by two stocks, that one, Flora Growth, and Agrify. And I don't remember exactly how high it was, but I want to say it was around $17. And the next morning it opened up just a little bit higher, like around 18. Well, they just raised $30 million at $3 with warrants. So that was kind of interesting uh, on the capital raising front. And obviously we had, there was some M&A during the week. I don't think that, oh yeah, so the M&A story that we covered was Schwaz out of Colorado doing more acquisitions. They actually did, well, the one that they announced last week that we included was a $29 million purchase of two dispensaries. One was in Glendale, where they actually recently, I think this week even, announced another acquisition of a dispensary. That was smaller, $4 million if I recall. And then Manitou Springs, near Colorado Springs. So anyway, they did disclose the transaction size, but not the revenue. And then the rest was pretty much earnings reports. And this week's earnings reports were generally not good. So we went through where the biggest and best companies had, I think, numbers that, in some cases they might have been a little bit worse than expected, but at the same time, they weren't as bad as feared. This week, a little bit different. So just going in alphabetical order, the first one was Green Lane, and they'd already pre-announced, but that report was received very poorly, and that's a big revenue generator. So we ran that one 41.3 million. The second press release that we ran related to financials was Jushi, and they had 13% sequential growth to 54 million, but like some other companies, a little bit soft on the outlook, right? We've seen that a lot. Another company that reported financials was Tilt Holdings, and their revenue was, I think, pretty much in line with expectations at 53.4 million, but their adjusted EBITDA was a little bit light, as was their guidance. And that was explained in the press release. So one of the worst reports, I think, that I saw, one of, was the parent company. Their revenue fell 27% sequentially to 39.7 million. And so, California had just a horrible pricing environment during the summer. And we saw this reflected in a lot of reports, including the parent company. And the parent company had growth in kind of its future, which is in delivery and retail, but its wholesale business was really weak. And then Trulieve. Now that was a great way to start the week, and it was interesting because we got a lot of follow through early in the morning, and Trulieve spiked up. Other stocks were doing better on Monday when they reported, but that reversed pretty quickly. And Trulieve's report was really strong. They beat on both the top line and the bottom line. And then finally, the last press release that we ran that's related to earnings was Verano, and Verano's revenue grew 4% sequentially. It was a little bit light of expectations. At the same time, their adjusted EBITDA margin was a lot higher. I talk about that in the feature article for the newsletter, and I'll get to that in a moment and explain what happened there. So we also run proprietary content. The proprietary content tends to be around some of our resources, like our indices. So we run that monthly. There's none of that. Our revenue tracker, and I thought I was going to do one mid-month, but honestly, it's too busy. So I will get that out near the end of the month. And then the other resource that we those are our resources. The other content that we run would be about market data. And so this week, Canada released their retail sales, and it was a record, but it was only a record because they revised down August. So it was about as close as you can get to being unchanged. The sales in Canada in September is what we're talking about, increased 0.2% from August. So if you do that by the number of days, it's more like a 3.5% increase, right? For the same number of days, because September has one less day. And in that piece, we kind of talk about what's the real driver, which is we've seen more stores in Ontario, and so that's what's really driving the year-over-year growth. It's slower in other markets, especially Alberta. So then the other type of content that we run is our interviews, and typically we run 2 a week. Sometimes it's one. This week it was actually 3. And the first one was an interview with Jason Wild. Jason's been an investor in this space for a long time, but the interview was about his role with TerrAscend, where he's executive chairman. And it's always great to hear from Jason, and that was the first interview that we ran on TerrAscend. The second one that we ran was on Urban Grow. If you don't know Urban Grow, and by the way, I like to disclose TerrAscend and Urban Grow are both clients of New Cannabis Venture. We run these interviews we don't charge for them, and actually about 74% of our interviews are with non-clients. But Urban Grow is a recent NASDAQ listing. The company's been around for a while. They reported their quarter recently, and we interviewed management. And I'd say that the key part of it is they have this $40 million war chest, and he kind of talked about some of the ways he intends to deploy it. The company is focused on two really big growing markets: cannabis, but also food cultivation. And then the last one was WM Technology. We interviewed the CEO, Chris Beals, and that was well timed. They just reported. We talked about that last week, and it was a disappointing outlook in the near term and slight reduction longer term. And he kind of it was a good overview of the company, and I'll leave it at that. So just to wrap it up, each week we share a little bit of perspective. This is really the only editorial. It's not that editorial, but it's really the only editorial type of content on New Cannabis Ventures. Everything else is pretty much fact-based, right? But I do share each week, and sometimes I go out on a limb like I did a few weeks ago. When I talked about Kronos last week, I shared something that I didn't think people were talking about that I thought was really exciting, the huge cash inflow into MSOS. So this week, I looked at the recent earnings reports from the top 5 MSOs and shared, I think this is one of these where you can just look at the picture rather than read the words, honestly, but shared a couple of graphics with some discussion. And so the first graphic was around, what did the reported earnings look like compared to what was expected for Q3? And so in general, the revenue was a little bit light. Two companies a little bit worse than the others. One company actually slightly ahead. And then on the adjusted EBITDA, a little bit soft all the way around, with one company in particular, Curaleaf, standing out negatively, and then one standing out very positively, Verano. And I explained what happened with Verano, and I'll just give this away. There was a little bit of an accounting change, but still super profitable. And then the other part of the discussion is around what happened to the 2022 outlook. Because, yes, stocks react to the short-term reports, but what really matters, I think, for driving stock prices is the future. And so we're at a time in the year where people are going to start to look at 2022. We're already more than halfway through the fourth quarter, and so this year's pretty much done. So the 2022 estimates pretty much across the board came down, but just a little bit. And so we have a situation, and you can look at the newsletter and see exactly how that played out. But we have a situation where the year-to-date price action right now is down, what did I come up with? Anywhere from 8 to 18%, I think, for Verano's not in there because they began trading later in February. But you have price declines for the largest MSOs. But we've had rapid growth, and the outlook today, a year forward, is way higher than it was a year ago, right? We've had strong growth this year. So even with the reduced 2022 outlook, it's very modestly reduced. It's still very strong growth, with the very weakest revenue growth among these 5 companies is 28%, which is not bad. In 4 of the 5 cases, Trulieve being the exception, by the way, the adjusted EBITDA is expected to be higher growth rate than the revenue. So we're seeing margin expansion. So getting to the end of, I like to keep these under 15 minutes. I succeeded today. It was a very rough week. I don't know if I can take much more of this, but hopefully not. I want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving for our American listeners, and you Canadian ones, I already wished you one a few weeks ago. So with that, everybody have a great week. Take care.